my spirit is supposed to be the best part of me, the most durable part of me, but not the only part of me.
So I heard you guys believe in this doctrine called theosis. Um, but I have a really hard time believing it because I had a bad drug trip.
There also has to be fasting. There has to be attendance at church services. There has to be care of the poor. There has to be the whole panoply of sacramental observance that is ours in the church. We have to become one with Christ, part of his body.
Don't boast that you know how to talk about the fathers and expound on scripture when you don't live the life of the fathers.
That takes time. It's like peeling back the layers of an onion. You have to keep scanning the horizon of your heart.
This is the Searchers of the Lost podcast, and I'm Father Nathan Simeon. Today, joined with me is Father Maximus at the Holy Resurrection Monastery. I have known Father Maximus for maybe, I don't know, 15 years, Father, something like that, believe it or not.
Well,
And Father Maximus is also my spiritual father, so I'm very excited to have him on with me this evening.
it's a pleasure.
So, Father, I told you about this podcast that I wanted to start called The Searchers of the Lost, which you know is a play on the Searcher of the Lost icon that's at Holy Resurrection Monastery.
Yes.
I thought maybe we just talk a little bit first about our meeting together, how we got to know each other a bit, and then we'll talk about maybe what this podcast is about, and get some of your spiritual direction for those who are searching after Christ with their whole heart. Does that sound
I'll,
about right?
I'll do my best. I should
Okay.
give a disclaimer. I used to be a lawyer.
So, Father, do you remember where we met?
I do. It was at the Benedictine Abbey at Valyermo in northern California, so northern Los Angeles County
That's
in the
right.
mountains.
That's right. Yeah.
My community had sold our property in the desert, in halfway between Los Angeles and Las Vegas, and we had moved for a few years to rent space in that Benedictine house, and of course they run a lot of retreats, and you were there as part of a retreat.
That's right. Yep, exactly. I was with a mutual friend, Father Luke Dysinger. I was doing a retreat on the use of the Psalms, and the spiritual life. And I was kind of sneaking away to that retreat because at that time, I don't even know if I was an Anglican yet. I can't even recall. I know that I had studied Anglicanism, but I wasn't even an Anglican yet, and I wasn't even fully convinced that Catholics were solid Christians.
My recollection is that I was going to say you were barely Christian, but that's not quite the case. But you were you had a lot of I think you had a lot of arguments.
You and I, no, that was probably you just getting to know me later on.
Okay.
Yeah. No, at that time I was really searching. I was
Mhm.
really searching, and I didn't know what to do with the whole Catholic world. And of course, as you know, I thought you guys were Eastern Orthodox.
Yeah, I think I
And
know what the difference. Sorry to interrupt, but
no,
I
sure.
think the reason I remember it being kind of conflict ridden introduction was because I was in turmoil at that in that period of my life, and my um, I think any discussion about matters of the faith was causing me to question my own um, where my how firmly my feet were planted in what I professed, and so that's where I think I think I got this memory of there being conflict.
That might be it. I because I you were incredibly pastoral. Um I so what happened was Father Luke, he said, "Does anyone want to go to experience this Eastern liturgy thing?"
Mm.
And I said, "Sure." And I went up with the group and we went into that little chapel that you guys had. And I remember Father Maximus being there. Your Father Maximus. I remember Father Moses being there, and of course Abbot Nicholas at the time.
Father
And
Basil.
I felt like it entered into a different millennium. It was the weirdest experience for me, but I knew I liked something about it.
Mm.
And I came out and I said, "Hey, to you, can I ask you a question?" I said, I said, so I heard you guys believe in this doctrine called theosis, um, but I have a really hard time believing it because I had a bad drug trip, which
Yeah.
made me really not
That's right.
want to think about being deified.
And I felt very inadequate to talk about that reality, because that was not something I had then experienced. Um, but just now you mention it, now I remember that very, very vividly.
Yeah, you kind of suggested I just put it down for a while. That was your suggestion and come back to it later. And of course I did. Of course I did.
In a big way.
Yeah. Yeah.
The rest
Full
is it.
on.
Yeah.
Yeah, what happened was kind of miraculous for me because when I went to Nashotah House, the Anglican seminary in Wisconsin, I didn't know you all had moved there. That was maybe 3, 4 years later. And then
Mm.
I end up at Nashotah House and I'm just searching around on the web and I find that you guys had just moved like 2 hours away
Yeah.
in Wisconsin. Quite providential.
Incredible. It's incredible. And then we visited the Shoda, right?
Yeah, that's right. Well, you guys visited when Metropolitan Hilarion Alfaev came.
Right.
Yeah,
Gosh, it
you
was
guys were there for that.
long, long past. And then it wasn't long after then. I guess you went to the seminary in Pittsburgh.
Yeah, yeah. So I left. Remember, I left like 3 months before ordination,
Uh-huh.
and I moved next to the monastery for
Right.
6 months.
Milked cows.
So milked cows. That's right. And you took over my job when I left.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Worst thing I ever did.
Yeah. I looked back at those days and I thought it's some of the most prayerful days I had in work
Mm.
was milking cows
Yeah.
for
Yeah,
sure.
there's something just very simple about it.
Yeah.
It's just one thing after another, and you can kind of just lose yourself in the rhythm.
Yeah,
So
it really is. It really is beautiful.
uh,
I I remember going to Holy Resurrection, and this will kind of segue into the purpose of the podcast. I had already, by the time I went to Holy Resurrection Monastery, I had already had 4 master's degrees in various theological subjects and from various institutions, all Protestant by that point, but all over the map with Protestants. And I remember struggling deeply with, am I going to be Orthodox? Am I going to be Byzantine Catholic? I knew I was going the Eastern route at that time. And Abbot Nicholas said, um, you come here and don't worry about that. Go, I can push you, I can get you in either direction if you like. Just come here and learn about Eastern spirituality. And that was really freeing for me. And my experience at the monastery was the most formative period of my Catholic life. And I still would say that's true because it taught me what the Byzantine Church can be when done well.
yeah. Yes, and by done well, I would think you don't necessarily mean executed technically well, but taken in its fullness in terms
That
of the texts,
that's it.
the feasts observed, the fasts observed, as much as a small community can manage. Um, I mean, that's what I would say. I wouldn't compare us to a great Athonite monastery or something, or some of the monasteries in Romania that I visited, but I would compare us to well, not to perhaps other monasteries, but to the vision that's enunciated in our typicon, in our monastic rule. And the vision outlined in Pope John Paul II's apostolic letter Orientale Lumen, from the light of the East. That was always sort of, we regarded that from the very beginning of our days in California as our charter, because it came out in 1995, exactly the year of our foundation. When I think of all the coincidences that have marked our journey over these last 30 years, because next year will be the 30th anniversary. It's just incredible, and your story has brought me back to some of those ones involving you and your family, but there's so many others as well. I mean, just the fact that when we're sitting in San Francisco in the Russian Catholic Center, wondering what to do, the Pope puts out a letter calling on people to support the renewal in Eastern Catholic monasticism. That's just how could you arrange that? I mean, it's incredible.
Yeah. Which you all were set to do. You all were set to really form a truly Byzantine community of monastics.
Yeah, and we've suffered for it. It has not been easy, because this form of monasticism, by which I would say would be marked by things like independent of any other religious communities, so dependent much more on the bishop, self-supporting financially, self-supporting spiritually too, and emotionally. These sort of elements that go into making us who we are very, very difficult to sort of conjure out of thin air in the church, which has lost its monastic, the beating heart of its monastic tradition. And so I think we first of all ran into some problems there, and when we started off in the Ruthenian jurisdiction. I think there were some objections to the depth with which we wanted to embrace the Byzantine tradition. So that's why we ended up essentially moving from that jurisdiction to the Romanian jurisdiction in 2006, with Rome's permission and blessing, because it was just the Romanian church is much more familiar with monasticism. It's much more the tradition is much more alive and temporary, and I think it's just been a better place for us to be. But we've always seen ourselves as a monastery for all Eastern Catholics, and indeed a monastery that plugs the Eastern Catholic tradition into our shared life with the Orthodox churches as well.
Sorry, that was my phone going off there.
Yeah.
So let me segue this. Father, you've been a monastic for how many years now?
31 really.
31?
Yeah, because if you count 1994 when I was a novice.
Yeah. No, we'll count that. So the big focus of the podcast that I'm interested in doing is really putting together deep conversation about big theological topics for people who are deeply trying to search for Christ. Yeah. So that kind of makes sense of the name Searchers of the Lost, right? I'm looking at I want a demographic of people who are asking hard questions, but who don't just want to get kind of the textbook theological answers, but actually want to get some life experience involved in those answers. And that's become a value to me, not only as a maturing priest, as a young maturing priest, but also because it really is the heartbeat of the East, right? To have experience involved in our theological journey and not just going textbook on everything.
Yes, I think it's instructive that in the Eastern tradition, certainly the Greek patristic tradition, monastic tradition, we still use that word nous a lot. It's often translated as mind, because we in modern, say, contemporary Western parlance, we have no word to really encapsulate that deep sense of unity that the pre-modern culture saw in the human being, in the human person. I often preach on spirituality and say that word spirit has been so degraded because we've become such dualists. We're constantly separating out body and materiality and spiritual. When we say, I can't accept your invitation to the party, but I'll be there in spirit. What we mean is I won't be there. And so a word that's supposed to denote presence comes to stand for absence. And my spirit is supposed to be the best part of me, the most durable part of me, but not the only part of me. I'm supposed to be this microcosm, as the fathers will use, is the term that they'll use, taken from the philosophy that they were trained in. And so I think any search, intellectually respectable search for a true spirituality that meets the needs of people who are searching intellectually, is that they must also submit their bodies and spirits and souls and minds to the discipline of the search. It's not enough just to conduct the search with the bare intellect. There also has to be fasting. There has to be attendance at church services. There has to be care of the poor. There has to be the whole panoply of sacramental observance that is ours in the church. We have to become one with Christ, part of his body. Christianity is not an intellectual exercise. It's one in which the nous is set free by its being disciplined through the body, through its being united to the body. And I think that's absolutely central to my understanding of where we would go from here in any conversation. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes great sense. Your words are I think just purely true and holy and right. And so here's I think the $1 million question once we just affirm that is true and holy and right and beautiful. How do you talk to the young guys who come to the monastery and are genuinely looking for answers, are genuinely looking for Christ? How do you instruct them to put the noetic life, the prayer, the life of prayer, above what seems like just such a dominant force in our society of intellectualizing the Christian faith or making the Christian faith purely an intellectual exercise? How do you, and this is something I'm struggling with, by the way, as a priest, how do I get these very interested young guys to realize that their happiness is only going to come from that life?
Well, it has to be by example, primarily. If my happiness comes from that life, then maybe I stand to have some standing. So it would be the legal term. You can't give what you don't have. You can't give what you haven't got. And that's a fundamental principle of any spiritual direction or mentorship. And I think all too often I have failed. Men have come to me for spiritual direction by not being able to give them what they need because I don't have it myself. So, and one thing is absolutely clear to me is that this generation demands authenticity, and they have very, very keen senses. They're keenly aware of anything that smacks of hypocrisy. I preached a sermon about 6 months ago the gospel was on the rich young man, I think, who comes to Jesus, and Jesus says, give away all your money and come follow me. And I preached a homily in which I actually went so far as to say everyone should give away all their money. Just as we coming to monastic life did. And a young man came and said, "Are you going to give everything up, Father Maximus?" And I sort of kind of laughed, and I haven't seen him since. You know, I feel that I let him down because we weren't able. I didn't want to have a conversation in which I might end up looking like a fraud.
You know, that's actually one of the things that I've always deeply appreciated about you. And I mean this so sincerely, is that you don't act like you have more than you have. You're quite open with your weaknesses, and I think one of the things where I do think young people are falling for inauthenticity is that there are a lot of gurus out there that kind of I was reading, who was it recently, I think it was Thomas A. Kempis. I'm taking a course right now on mystical theology in the Middle Ages, which is essentially Western mystical theology.
Mm.
And he talks about no, it is Francis, I'm sorry. He says don't boast that you know how to talk about the fathers and expound on scripture when you don't live the life of the fathers, right? And there might have been slightly different terminology that sounds like Eastern terminology I'm using there, the fathers, you know, but it rung so true of me, not only about um so many kind of modern gurus, it also of course convicted me that
Mm.
um so often I kind of pride myself in my orthodoxy,
Mm.
and I'm kind of like, well, I hope my orthopraxy will catch up with that someday, right? But it really is not so orthodox at all, to think this way.
Yeah, it's one's orthodoxy is expressed through one's orthopraxy, or not at all. I mean, faith without works is dead, says St. James. You talk about my being open. I may as well come clean on this point. Is that central to my experience of this anything to do with spirituality now is that I'm a participant in Alcoholics Anonymous as a recovering alcoholic. That happened around the time I started milking cows. I started drinking too much, and I've come to appreciate the 12-step practice as opening up a window into the most authentic Eastern spirituality, the spirituality of the Desert Fathers. I think actually it's the 12-step program of practical living and in recovery is the closest thing we have today to a truly accessible spirituality for the masses. And it may even be the most important spiritual development in the 20th century, carrying on into the 21st century. And that may sound like I'm sort of short shrifting the patristic tradition, but I don't think I am, because I think the two things go very well together. There was a famous incident when the founder of one of the co-founders of AA was in his room writing out what they call the big book, writing out the 12 steps, and there was a knock on the door, and it was a Jesuit priest, I think it was Father Dowling is his name, who had seen somehow he'd been brought into contact with the 12 steps, and was convinced that this author, Bill W. is his name, he must know the works of St. Ignatius of Loyola, because he saw so many things in common with that tradition. And that tradition, although there are some differences, is itself an outgrowth of the patristic teachings. So, I see all these connections, and that's all I can say at this point. I just see all these connections, and they come alive for me in so many different ways. And I'm finding that I can't be authentic anymore unless I tell people where I'm at in my recovery. I can't do it.
Which is huge. I think that's incredible, Father, because most of us, including myself, if we look within ourselves, what we find is that there's a lot that we're not letting out. Someone came to me the other day and said, and I was reading such and such a text. It was from one of the fathers, and I can't recall who, but it was talking about there was an Eastern father, but they were relating the passage to general confession, right? Which is, for those who don't know, it's something more common in the Western tradition where it's not for the forgiveness of sins, but you kind of run through your life and explain, kind of hear all the things I struggle with in my life, and I was telling her, well, this is a little bit more than that even, okay? Because what's going on is this is a monastic text, and traditionally, if you're a monastic and you have a spiritual father, you're not just revealing the struggles you've gone through, and you're not just revealing the sins. You're actually revealing every thought that comes into your mind, right? Which is, well, that's a lot harder to dig that deep, right? To go in there and say, well, yeah, I just walked by this person and the thought came in my head, I could push them in the middle of the street and have them run over by a car, right? I mean, we don't want to bring up that thought. And likely we didn't even enjoy that thought, but that thought, it was a thought nevertheless, right? And it's like, well, that's the kind of depth that we're asking to get to. We're asking to get to the kind of depth which just admits all of that fallen stuff.
That takes time. It's like peeling back the layers of an onion. You have to keep scanning the horizon of your heart in order to just see, as you keep digging, just to change the metaphor, using the metaphor of St. Macarius, turning over the soil of the heart. It is a labor. It is work, because we are mysteries to ourselves, because we're so alienated from ourselves, and therefore we're alienated from God. And so any program of recovery, which is what the fathers are teaching us, and what contemporary spirituality is also trying to teach us, any program of recovery worth its salt is response to the gospel command to love God, neighbor, and self in that order. Love God through prayer, love neighbor through service, love self through discipline. And
yeah, kind of cutting back to that point you made a little bit earlier, that basically the young man was asking you, if in fact you are willing to give up everything for the Lord. I think he probably wasn't aware that you're thinking about all those things and have been doing it for at least 31 years.
Well, I could have taken that route. I could have said, what are you talking about? I don't have my bank account. I don't have my own car. I don't have my own this, that, or the other. But he looked around, the furniture and the food, Father Moses's food on the table, and he saw that we lived pretty well, and there are a lot of people who live, even though we take a vow of poverty. Our poverty is not uncomfortable poverty; it's sharing of goods, but we're not wearing hair shirts. We're not living under bridges, or we're not standing on pillars. So what was the point I was trying to make? I guess
you're not willing for me to give you an escape route. Yeah. So right. I get you.
Yeah, I mean, for us, well, speaking for me, the most difficult aspect of the vows is definitely obedience, surrender of the will, because I am totally self-centered and self-driven, and which is why it's the root of the addiction. Addiction to sin, of which my alcoholism is a subspecies, and to discover how deeply rooted that selfishness is a constant surprise. Now, I know we seem to have moved quite a ways from talking about people who are interested in deep questions, and have a deep intellectual thirst for I suppose finding ways to meld their spiritual journey with their intellectual journey, but we haven't, because as I said before, any authentic spirituality, any authentic spiritual connection that is made and sustained with God, who is spirit, has to involve a complete surrender of everything that we are, everything that we have. And I think one of my favorite theologians, contemporary Orthodox theologians, is Father John Beyer, St. Vladimir's and elsewhere. And he makes the point frequently that it's only when we surrender completely, which is to say when we die, when we're completely surrendered to God, that he finally can do something with us. Death is the great doorway that we all must walk through. And once we surrender to that as Christians, finally, upon that great day, we can become true servants of God.
Yeah, I think even in the theological journey, and by that I'm speaking about the intellectual journey. I'm not at this point giving a definition of theology. It's taken me a long time to really realize just that. That it's really the surrender that's going to ultimately be my saving grace. Because it's, the theology world is a fun world. It's like Disneyland. There's so much to explore. There's so much fun, interesting, and I'm kind of a nerd by nature. But you kind of realize at some point that it can only take you so far. It was actually Diadochos of Photiki, who's that 5th century writer from the Philokalia, who says he talks about theology, the job of theology of leading us to the bridal chamber, where we can actually find union with God. Right. And so, I mean, it kind of makes sense that it's taken me a while to really appreciate, and I'm sure it will take me quite a bit more time, but to fully appreciate, but to really appreciate that really has to be my end game. It has to be that the beliefs that I'm acquiring and learning about and fascinated with are leading me to give up myself more and more.
Mm.
But it's not easy. I'm sure you do this, Father, but for me, I'll be oftentimes probably on a daily. I'm asking myself, what are the things that I'm holding back from you? Um, and I have to, because I'm trying to be honest with myself. I find there are these things that are really, really hard to
Yeah.
let go of, and some of them are so stupid.
Mm.
Like one of the recent ones I've been struggling with, and it's because I opened myself up to this dumb thing. I started listening to like rock music again when I was working out,
Mhm.
just to get a good workout.
Mm.
And then I struggled having to give up rock music again. It's just why was that a thing that I would think was sufficient to get in the way of my journey of giving up myself for Christ? Right? How did that become a temptation for me?
Yeah. For me, it's politics this year.
Politics, that's a huge
Mm.
one.
Mm. And it's so easy to convince yourself, like with the music, you're convincing yourself that, well, this is in service of a greater aim, which it was. Working out's a good thing. And politics, it's in service of a greater aim, which it is, up to a point. But it, we we're always looking for a way out, and um, I don't know why that's true. I just know that that's my experience. Um, that we just have to keep coming back again and again and again to the same loving Father who sacrifices himself for us over and over again. And it's the Father who sacrifices himself. In the story of the prodigal son, I was reading it in Greek very badly, um, pouring over it in Greek because I'm sort of being trained in that again, doing some with a friend of the monastery who's a retired professor of Greek. And I hadn't realized that the word for profit that's translated as property, the father gave his, or the son, his inheritance or his property, is vion, vion, life. The father gives his life, his livelihood, we might say in English, but the word is literally life.
So it'd be vios,
Yeah,
but then in the accusative, right?
yeah,
So when he's giving it, it
yeah,
becomes beyond.
yeah. And so the father, is sacrificing himself. It's like, the beautiful image in the West of the pelican in her piety. The pelican that feeds her young from her own, the blood from her own breast. We get that in the Lamentations on Holy Saturday, and it's uh, surrender is the we're called upon to surrender because God does it. When we read in Philippians that Christ condescends and, to come down, even to death, even down to Hades. Um, this is not him pretending. Again. This is how I get this from John Bayer. I like this. He says this is how God does God. This is God Godding.
Hmm.
It's sacrifice. It's self-sacrifice all the way down and all the way up.
I have written down the two passages which are kind of like my life theme passages, and also the passages that I would say are most important for this kind of a podcast, The Searchers of the Lost. Matthew 7:7,
Mm.
ask and it will be given to you, seek and you will find, knock and it will be open to you.
Mm.
Right, which speaks to the necessity of fortitude and persistence. But but then also the second passage is Matthew 13:44. The kingdom of heaven is like a treasure hidden in a field. When a man found it, he hid it again. Then in his joy went out and sold all that he had and bought that field.
Mm.
Right. So it's that willingness to give up everything, which is really that life journey that you're speaking of.
Mm. And I guess my question then to anybody who would be contemplating what that means to them in their life is, I suppose it's how can I love the God who seems to demand such a high price? Because what I much rather would have in my quotidian thinking is a God who I keep in my
Oh,
back.
hold on real quick here, Father. Let me put you on pause. We just heard Metro Police. I'm in Las Vegas, so give me 1 second here.
All right.
See what pitfalls to avoid
Okay.
as you're going about along this journey.
Well, we've already talked about not falling into the trap of dualism,
Mhm.
of becoming too to think of ourselves as inhabiting, this bifurcated universe, this two-story universe that Father Stephen Freeman talks about. I think that's really important. Is to if you're going to talk to somebody about their intellectual journey, then that person should be prepared to answer some questions about their experience as well. We would say in the AA program, 12 steps, the experience, strength, and hope.
Okay, so let me ask you this, Father. So you've had a lot of novices come to the monastery. You've met a lot of young men who are considering being monastics, who are clearly therefore deeply searching. They clearly just come in wanting to find Christ, to find the depths of the teachings of the church, to experience those things. You've also seen, and I've been witness to, tearful days when it doesn't work out.
Mm.
You've experienced young men who don't like the answers that they got, that they maybe leave the path of searching for Christ deeply.
Mhm.
What are some of the pitfalls that you wish you could kind of retrospectively warn people about?
Well, everybody's experience is going to be different. That's one thing. You can't look at anybody. You can't look at someone else's what their experience has been and say, well, that's how I should map mine onto theirs exactly. It's going to be different for everyone. You may find yourself with people who find prayer comes easy to. That does not mean if prayer does not come easy to you that there's a problem with you. It may be that your prayer, because it's actually more difficult, is that much more valuable precisely for that reason, because it comes out of the heart being wrung out like blood from a stone. It will depend on what context that prayer is arising out of. Is it coming out of a heart which is kept clean and pure of actual sin, or is it coming out of a heart that is mired in sin? And so that's actually the problem. So that requires the careful picking through the life of your life with the assistance of a spiritual father. So I would say one of the pitfalls would be not having a spiritual father, being dishonest, not being honest with your spiritual father. So choosing a man or a woman who you for reasons other than this is a person I can be honest with would be a mistake. It would be better to choose somebody who may actually be less compatible with you in terms of friendship or because it's a simpatico. You're not looking for a friend in a spiritual father. It may happen, but it's not what you're looking for. What you're looking for is somebody who will tell you the truth and who you will find you're compelled to tell the truth to that person, because he won't let you get away with not telling the truth. One of the things that true repentance will do is it'll take away, it'll rob you of the pleasure of sin. It won't let you sin pleasantly anymore. It's a real nuisance in that way. I think those are two pretty big ones, actually. And I think also not being dualist and not being dishonest. And then I suppose the third thing, if I can find the right way of phrasing it, is to turn up, not to be turned away by failure, but to pick yourself up and keep coming back. There's a lady who came to one of the retreats I gave at Bellumo, and she still sends money about every 6 months or so because she says how much that piece of advice did for her. Just keep coming back. So, and I don't take any credit for that. I just that's because that's all I've done for 30 years. I just keep coming back. I just keep turning up. And God doesn't let me down. He's never let me down. Now I felt like that, at times, but it's never been true.
That's really my last big question for you that I wanted to ask is what have you found? What has been, if you were to look at yourself 31 years ago, right? And you're beginning this incredible journey of being a monastic, and you fast forward 30 years, and what would you be surprised about that you found, or even that you didn't find?
I'm surprised by how tough it's been. I'm surprised by how resilient my self-will is, how powerful it is, how often it's been proven to be my enemy, but I keep going back to it. How stubbornly I cling to it. I mean, that's the thing that surprises me. The love of God does not surprise me. The mercy of God does not surprise me. I may even go a little bit too far in the other direction, in terms of in the direction of presumption. But I'm not surprised by his love. I am surprised by my capacity to resist that love. After 30 years of preaching about it, praying for it, and all the my adventures in in failure, Because really, my spiritual life is the story of failure. That's been the constant theme through my spiritual life, and I thank God for that, because it's the failure that has been the fuel for my progress. It's I've been it's like Casey Jones, piling the steam engine, the boiler um, with wood or coal that has kept me going.
What would you say? What would you say that looks like? Like to see that as a progress, right? To see those failures as your actual progress.
After a while, it makes you feel grateful. It and that's the only thing I can point to, is that um, the more I become aware of my own sinfulness, the more I become aware of my own tendency to fail, of my own desire to control the universe. Um, as the onion keeps getting peeled away, the layers of the onion keep getting peeled away, and I become more and more aware that there's still more selfishness there. I get over one hill, and there's another hill of self-centeredness, to master, to conquer. It just seems to go on and on and on, one damn thing after another. It just never seems to end. Um, but I know that I'm moving, and I know that the fathers certainly teach that movement and the spiritual life are essential. That the worst thing you can do is be stagnant. And who was I reading with? There was a particular father who was talking about that. Recently, I was reading. I can't remember the source, but a spiritual writer, maybe not a father of the church, but a spiritual writer generally, made that point that all spiritual life is a life of friction. There's no movement without friction, and so what I have found in terms of like the intellectual aspect of that friction is that when I find myself spiritually challenged, what I tend to do is retreat into theology. That's an avoidance technique. And what I would prefer to do is to let the theology guide me into the spiritual life. That be the other way around. The intellectual aspect of my religious life bear fruit in a deeper and more authentic spirituality. That's the way it's supposed to work. And too often I find myself wanting to run away from my version of religious reality into a book or a conversation. Now, that's not to say a conversation can't be tremendously beneficial, because I can be put back on the right path by that conversation. But that's usually because God has performed something of a miracle, and it's usually the faith of the person I'm talking to that is like the faith of the men who bring the paralyzed man on his mat. It's his faith or her faith has set me free.
Which is so often said by the fathers,
Mm,
right? You're speaking with others to receive a word.
yeah.
Otherwise, it's really not very beneficial.
And even in AA, they say the same thing. It's the idea is that in the 12th step, where we help, our primary purpose is to help another alcoholic. You may find that that person goes back to drinking, but you'll stay sober because you've because of the interaction you've had with this person. Like by putting yourself in at his or her service, you have you have carved out for yourself a whole new way of relating to reality. And I think that's what I'm saying in terms of the spiritual life as well. That it bears fruit in action, and it will always bear fruit in action, even when the person that you're talking to rejects the fruit that has bloomed, that has emerged. A good conversation is one in which you come away from it feeling like you've really said some things that are true. A good conversation is one where you haven't sold the farm. You haven't just tried to make peace. Now, that's not saying that we should be deliberately looking for ways to get each other's dander up, but I think that worst kind of conversations I've ever had are ones where I compromise, and that has had a lot of negative effects on my ability to pray. I felt guilty. I felt like I let the side down. I felt like I betrayed the truth, and I just feel just really poor. Like I don't want to pray now. A lot of that is the evil one trying to undermine my desire to pray, but that's what it'll do.
Mm. And the more we practice compromised speech, the more others expect that compromised speech from us.
Exactly.
And we set up our future reality, which is just so depressing because then it becomes so difficult to get out of that trajectory.
Well, do you have any other?
I think that's it, Father, for now.
Thank you,
Thank
Father.
you. Yeah, thank you for your
I hope
time.
I hope I haven't been too scattered.
I think we kept it within the line of focus.
Okay.
So I think we're good. You're taking off to Australia soon.
Next week,
Okay. And for how long? For a month, was it?
September 11th. uh, yeah, for a month. Come back
Okay.
October 7th. Someone pointed out it's 2 very inauspicious days to be flying. Um,
Yeah, I was in Australia
oh yeah,
um uh on September 11th.
really?
Yeah, I was there. I was with a mission group and it was with Youth with a Mission and we were sitting around and one of the was an Aboriginal guy we were staying with and he came and he goes,
Mm.
I got to tell you guys what just happened. And all of us kind of, I was 18 years old.
Mm.
We're all calling our parents and freaked out. And I remember everybody crying. Everyone remembers the day that happened, but I was in Australia when that happened.
Well, that would be doubly why you would remember. I was in the shower at Newbury Springs, and Father Moses came banging on my door with this big New Jersey accent. We're at war. We're at war, but we don't know who with. And I thought he was just BSing me.
At war. That's a great response. That sounds like a Father Moses response.
Yeah. So he went into town that day and did some shopping, and he came back and he'd seen all the television screens in the department store were I guess Costco, wherever we were shopping, were showing the one, that scene of the plane hitting the
Yeah.
tower over and over and over again.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, that was crazy.
Yeah,
That was a crazy time.
these were the days when we had dial-up internet, and so you could just barely get a still photograph. And the other thing I remember very vividly is the absence of aircraft, because we were in a flight path, and for what was it, a week? It just the skies were silent. That was so eerie.
Mm.
But yeah, anyway, so I'm
Enjoy your flight.
I know 15 hours from LA, and 4 hours to get to LA from Chicago. I'm traveling with a friend. Um, my this is the I'm finding traveling more and more difficult with my Parkinson's. So my dyskinesia, which is my leg keeps moving, and that's going to be not fun. So pray for me, and pray for the person who sits next to me.
I will pray for you. Pray for me also, Father.
How's the family?
They're wonderful. They're doing great. Yeah.
Good.
Yeah, they're doing very good.
We're still being recorded, I see.
We are. We are. I think I've told you this before. Maybe I haven't. We prayed the Kentuckian that you wrote as a family in the evening.
Nice.
It's put to
The Search of the Lost.
That's put to good use.
Good.
The Search of the Lost. That's right. It's the theme.
Yeah. She's looked after us for a long time. A generation. 30 years.
I sometimes wonder if that's the icon that called me to your monastery.
Yeah.
So many young guys have come to that monastery, and Father Nicholas was so good at reaching out to kind of wandering Protestants.
Mm.
He was so good at that. That was really a skill set of his.
Mm.
I'll always be eternally grateful for that. So, all right,
Yeah.
Father. Well, God bless you.
God bless you too, Father.
Thanks for joining us. And then, when you get back, hopefully we'll get to talk a bit.
All right then.
Okay.
Take care. God bless.
God bless. Bye-bye.
Bye.